We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management, archaeology, and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 180 for January 1st, 2020. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about the future of CRM Archaeology and your 2020 goals. So shrug off that hangover and set those goals because it's a brand new year and the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today is Bill in Northern California.
Hello.
And Heather in Southern California.
Happy New Year, everyone.
There you go. And it's January 1st, 2020. New year. I haven't seen, or I guess I should say I've seen shockingly little like advertising. I guess it's maybe because we don't have cable. Maybe there is this kind of stuff going around, but shockingly little advertising around about how 2020 is the year of clarity and vision because, 2020 vision kind of thing. But I feel like it's just like a missed opportunity, right?
Totally.
Especially with the zeros. They'd be like glasses.
my wife's name is Clarity anyway. So around our
Nice.
house, that's just how it is.
That's just how it is. Nice. Well, so for this episode, since it is the first episode of the year for the CRM Archaeology Podcast, Bill, I think it's the start of our, we're going to be hitting, is it 8 years in February? Is that our anniversary? Is it 8 years this year? I think it might be.
Probably.
This podcast.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Yeah. It's however old one of your children is.
It's like part of my son I think he was 1 when we started. And my daughter wasn't born yet. Yeah. And now my daughter's going to be 7 next year and he's going to be 10.
Wow.
There you go. So it's between 7 and 10 years. All right. So that's fantastic. So we'll talk about that more when the time comes in a few episodes. But this is episode 180, as I mentioned at the top of the show, and it's a brand new year. So let's talk about, I figured we would talk about goals and the future and where things are going. I have another client who's a real estate agent, and she has a podcast for real estate agents or people interested in real estate. And they always have goals because they're entrepreneurs, basically. I mean, real estate agents are often just working for themselves, even though they might be part of another team. They're usually like independent contractor kind of thing. So they all have their own individual goals, not only financial, but, professional and those things. So I thought it would be good for us to sort of assess where we've been, where we want to go, and what's going on. So the first question I wrote down is kind of a big one, which is where do we see CRM Archaeology going in the future? And I don't mean just 2020, but I do think that in the past couple of years, we've seen a growing shift of archaeology to more and more to engineering firms and bigger archaeology firms than, say, mom and pop firms. Now, that might be a little bit different in California because there's a lot of small, independent, one-person shops or 2 or 3-person shops in California. But I feel like in the rest of the country, and maybe it's just I don't know, maybe I'm getting some sort of skewed view or something like that, but it seems like it's more and more large companies that are doing CRM. And I don't know if that's I have my opinions on whether or not that's a good or a bad thing, but I want to get your guys' thoughts on that. Heather, we'll start with you because you are working for a large engineering firm, and so it's kind of fits. And like, do you see the tide of this whole thing kind of moving that way as CRM as a whole, or maybe even just speak for the Southern California area? I don't know.
As far as a large environmental firm, I wouldn't consider Dudek a large environmental firm, and we actually focus on we don't want to be one of those like international firms like AECOM or
Sure.
We are, we specialize in being, very West Coast specific, but we do work across the nation. But I think that, and I'll just use that model, the Dudek model, but it's also how I feel is that we still need to be very specific in the way that we treat each project. So it's not like a cookie cutter. And sometimes that's what happens when you get into these larger environmental firms, is that, the quality gets, it suffers, and the specificity of the analysis suffers. And our discipline really relies on that specificity and in a way, the myopic view of analysis. And so it's important that we not get that cookie cutter mentality. And I do think that you're right. It is starting to move in that way because it's becoming more and more difficult for the mom and pops, especially to deal with. Although, I've seen how you are navigating that, where you're working as a sub for other companies. So, that's a good avenue. But if you have in this area, we have, we do have some mom and pops, but they are starting to, as they retire, they're starting to disappear. These companies they're just basically focused on that one person. And when that person retires, a majority of the new people that are coming into this business are coming into environmental firms. And so I think we're going to see, those smaller firms start to wane in numbers, sadly, because I do think that they do have an absolute role. And I think that in a way, sometimes they keep things honest with the larger firms. When you have, especially, in the Santa Barbara area, we have the smaller firms, and the agencies really do appreciate using the local, very regionally experienced companies, and they're very loyal to them. And it does help keep, the quality of work high. And actually still have somewhat of an academic perspective, and when it comes to the scholarly or the theoretical side, because there still is that aspect that we can't forget when we're writing these reports. So, and doing the analysis. So I do think, yes, it is going into that direction, but I hope to see that if we lose those smaller companies, that we adopt their approach in the way that we handle our analysis and investigations.
Yeah, and let me just comment on that real quick, because as a small business owner, and an entrepreneur in a number of different fields, I think that there's a vision that the smaller, like, 1 or 2 person operations, that they might have more flexibility and they might have more academic approach to things. They have more time to put into things because they're not running 25 projects at once. The quality is going to be there because they can individualize. And while that may be true of, say, a small craft shop or something like that, just to put it in a different way, versus like one of the, like, Michael's, if you're going to bring it into like crafting, that might be true in that case. And in a lot of retail sense, yeah, the smaller shops, they do have the ability to put the attention on. But honestly, speaking as a small business owner, I don't think that's true for CRM at all, because the margins are so small. And if anything, they're even smaller for the small firms, because we don't have a fleet of trucks to pull from. I have my truck, my personal truck, the one I bought for my business, but it's my truck. And if that breaks, I'm going to have to rent a car at $150 a day, right? So, if that's the case, then I have that. And if I have, say, people working for me, or I need other people for a small thing, I can't just pull anybody from another department or another office like some firms can. I have to hire somebody. I have to go out there and do that. And then when it comes down to the after the project stuff, like, am I going to present this at a conference? Well, do I have time to go to a conference? Because I'm a small independent business owner. I don't have time to go to a conference and spend $2,000 to go to the SAAs so I can prevent.
Yeah, I don't either, though.
Yeah. Well, no, you don't. But a lot of companies do have budgets for that kind of thing, where, Sure. if you're presenting on research that the company's done, then they'll pay for you to go to the conference. I'm not saying all companies do that, but I think there's a higher likelihood that would happen versus working for yourself, because obviously now you're the one paying for it.
One little thing, because I think maybe I didn't communicate it fully, though, that, when you have the larger companies, you end up getting a certain type of work, quite a bit of it, the regulatory, the M&Ds, the EIRs. And so you end up doing quite a bit of that work. And that work is fed to you through the planners, through the CEQA specialists or the NEPA specialists. And so sometimes you can have people, we have certain offices that are hyper-focused on these larger, M&Ds, EIR sections, and that's what they do. And they don't even get to they don't get to excavate. They don't get to dig, they reach out and I mean, they do get some of that, but there's so much work to do with, the regulatory sections, that they don't get that practice that the smaller companies get. So you're saying do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a good point. The type of work that you get at these different levels is definitely different. Yeah, I agree.
So given that it seems like there's market condensation, do you still think that there's room for people to start their own cultural resources company?
I get that question all the time from people that want to start their own CRM firm. And quite frankly, I don't see the point in it anymore, unless you can specialize in something and say, hey, I'm starting a CRM services company where we do specifically, drone work, or we do specifically, GIS work or something like that, or maybe a company that supplies field equipment. I mean, I don't know, but it seems ridiculous for me to somebody say in 2020 that, hey, I've got a master's degree and I want to, quote, work for myself, and I'm going to do the same thing everybody else is doing and start a company. If you're going to do that, you're going to hate your life. I'm not going to say you're going to fail. You'll probably succeed in the sense that you'll get work and you'll be able to do stuff, but you're going to work 20 hours a day. Look at Sonia. Sonia, a regular host of this show, she's constantly putting in hours and hours and hours. And she likes that kind of thing because she's got that entrepreneurial spirit, and she's a business owner. So that kind of is what drives her. She'd rather do that for herself than do that for somebody else. But man, I think you've got to be 100% nuts to start your own CRM firm right now in this climate.
Well, then I guess the other question, because that's exactly what you were saying, that unless you want to do the same exact thing that we've already been doing over and over, do you think there's room for innovation? Because that's the main root. That's the reason why anyone starts their own company. Everyone that I know that's been in the industry for 30 something years was like, I wanted to do my own research. I wanted to do my own thing, and I was sick of handing over all my money to everybody else. And there are definite benefits to owning your own business. I mean, taxes, a whole bunch of other stuff. But I mean, there's definite. The number one thing is that you get to do things your own way. But do you think that the way the rules are set up, the way the game is developed or whatever, that there's only space for us all to do the same exact thing that already exists? Mm-hmm. Or is there room for us to do something else?
Well, along that line, I mean, I do one thing that I think is going to be a bit, I hate to say, a fatal flaw with this mentality is that when people are going to be coming out of college, they say they want to start their own business, or they've been working for a little bit for a firm, and then they decide they want to branch off on their own. There is no way that you're going to be able to service your clients if you have not worked within an environmental firm coming straight out of college, because there's just no, especially in California, with any state that has a lot of regulatory requirements, you just don't have the chops yet. You don't have the experience. You're not getting it from university. And even in the best university, you're not going to get the experience that you need to know how to service your clients completely. And the clients, obviously, as Chris or anyone else knows, it's about money and it's about time and being efficient. So they're not going to sit around and waiting. They want to know that they're going to go in and it's a one-stop shop, and they don't have to hire this, this vendor, that, the different firms. That's definitely why the environmental firms are being successful, is because it is a one-stop shop, for one thing. It's a lot more efficient, just even on a really smaller scale. Your GIS figures, you're saving money just in the GIS figures. So you can use the same across the board for quite a few of the different disciplines. And so that saves money. And that's just one example. But I don't see how anyone can come out of college and have their own mom and pop and do it well. They have to have that practice and the perspective of working in the business for a while before they're going to be able to actually have a company and do something other than just phase ones. Mm-hmm. So then the other thing is, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to be working for an environmental firm. Obviously, I haven't owned my own company before, but if you pick your company correctly, then and sometimes that takes working for different companies over time, but until you find the right one. But if you find one that's flexible, and like where I'm working now, if I have a passion or something I believe that we can make some money on, and I can prove it with numbers, they're behind me 100%. There's a lot of flexibility in working with an environmental firm if you're working for the right ones.
Yeah. And I think that if you're if you've got the attitude of somebody like you, Heather, who does see, hey, here's an opportunity for us. I can back this up with numbers and graphs and statistics because that's what the higher ups are looking at. Because of course they're always concerned with the budget and the bottom line. I mean, to be honest, that might seem dirty and weird to some people, but we are working for a for-profit business. I mean, that's what CRM Archaeology is. So if you're not thinking that way, if you're not thinking about how am I going to make money either for myself to support my employees or even just my own family, but also the company that I'm working for, if I'm not working for myself, you have to be thinking that way. And then speaking more to, I'm agreeing with you, Heather, is that I think, honestly, if I had it to do all over again, I probably would have tried to seek out more positions, although at like larger engineering firms, although those just aren't and kind of still aren't available really in Reno. There are some big companies that are doing work in Nevada, but as far as having an office here and being able to live here, we'd had to move or something like that. And I don't think we were really prepared to. This is all when I started my CRM firm. And then that goes into speaking to Bill's point. I started mine not to do things the same way that everybody else has done, but to bring some innovation into the field. I specifically started my own company because I was getting so much pushback from companies I was working for regarding digital archaeology. Now, to be honest, digital archaeology was still very much in its infancy from a recording, textual, and photographic data standpoint. I mean, GIS has been around for a while, but that's not really digital archaeology anymore. That's just kind of standard. But as far as using applications to record textual data and photographic data and then manipulate those into site forms has something that is still way new for people, even in 2020. But I was getting so much pushback on even the idea of it and the idea of experimenting with it that I was just getting frustrated. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to start my own thing. And sure, I'm going to seek out the kind of projects that everybody else is seeking out, but I'm going to do these in a completely different way. I'm going to bid on them in a completely different way, and I'm going to complete them in a very different way. And I feel like I've succeeded in that in most cases. But again, speaking to Bill's point, Bill, I think there is room for people to start a CRM firm, but not if you think I'll get more flexibility and I'll get more projects that I want to do. That is actually, quite frankly, the wrong attitude, because you're going to be unhappy with business ownership. But if you go into it with a entrepreneurial mindset and sort of an adventurous mindset and say, listen, I've got this idea, like I just want to do things in a different way than everybody else is doing, or maybe tweak this a little bit. And I don't have the freedom to do that in any company I'm working with right now. So I think I'm going to try to do it on my own. And if you can do that and succeed, then you'll gain the ever important market advantage and start taking down some of your competitors, which is also kind of the point. Right. I mean, that's just how things work in this world.
Well, big companies always, they start somewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
They weren't always a big company.
No. And, I'll say this right before we go to break, and then Bill, you can respond on the other side of break here. Heather, the way you were speaking about Dudek, like where you guys are positioned, how you're positioned, the size that you are, what you focus on, man, I would be real surprised if you weren't acquired by one of the big engineering firms in the next 2 or 3 years.
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen. But I understand.
There's a price for everything.
I've watched it. What's that?
Everybody's got a price.
Well, we have, we're employee owned too, so that has something to. Yeah. So
yeah. All right.
There's a few more hurdles there to jump.
Indeed. All right. Well, on that note, let's go to break and then come back on the other side and keep talking about this. Back in a second. Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code CRM Arc. Looking to expand your knowledge of X-rays and imaging in the archaeology field? Then check out An Introduction to Paleoradiography, a short online course offering professional training for archaeologists and affiliated disciplines. Created by archaeologist, radiographer, and lecturer James Elliott, the content of this course is based upon his research and teaching experience in higher education. It is approved by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists as 4 hours of training. That's in the UK, for those of you that don't know. So don't miss out on this exciting opportunity for professional and personal development. For more information on pricing pricing, and course structure, visit paleoimaging.com. That's PALEO imaging.com, and look for the link in the show notes to this episode. All right, welcome back to CRM Arch Podcast, episode 180 and 2020, brand new 2020. So, Bill, we didn't get to you right at the end of that conversation. What's your thoughts on business ownership and all the stuff we were just talking about?
Well, it sounds about right. I mean, I worked for companies, regional ones that then got acquired. I haven't seen any of the companies that I worked at when they were small companies grow into large companies. Mm-hmm. But, then again, I'm talking about working from like 2003 or whatever till now. So most of the huge companies, CCRG, but the only company that I've seen go from small to big is Paleo West. Yeah. But the other ones were already big. Gray and Pape, they were already big by the time I started doing CRM. But you said something interesting about being a specialist, because I really do feel like, that's one of the things that actually you can actually build expertise and ability in a graduate program specifically and develop the kind of skills that you could sell out to other companies. One of the things that I'm thinking of is like botanical remains analysis, like paleobot or any of those kind of things, zoo archaeology. Those are all things that you could definitely get expertise as a PhD or a master's student and try to market those things. So where do you think that falls in the whole industry? Because if it is all about doing things quicker and cheaper, someone who's an independent, scholar that doesn't doing some of these things that you don't really need a science lab or something like that, multi-million-dollar equipment. Do you think that there's space for individuals like that to market themselves? And then how would they even start doing that?
So I think there's two ways they could do that. First off, with any business ownership, whether you're starting a CRM firm or you are a specialist, like you're a paleobotanist or something like that, maybe you just deal with it. The material that comes to you, maybe you actually go in the field and collect for companies. I've had geoarchaeologists come out on projects I've been working on that were specially coming out there to do like some soil analysis or something like that, but they physically came out themselves and did that. So I think there's two things that people need to think about if they're going to specialize. One, you need to start right now. If you think you're going to do this and you're in school, or maybe you're not in school, but you're thinking about doing this, you need to, if you don't have any money, which you probably don't, get onto YouTube, get onto some other programs, find some self-paced programs where you can learn how to really use social media and marketing to market yourself. Because everybody thinks that if you build it, they will come model is going to work, but it's simply not, especially if you're going to niche down and specialize in one of these things. People aren't just going to know that you exist, right? You have to be out there. You have to be willing to promote yourself. And a lot of archaeologists, to be quite frank, are quite introverted, and they just want to do their work and get their stuff done. And they don't like self-promotion. They don't like, putting themselves out there and telling other people about what they can do and how they can do it. But you have to do that as a business owner. Or conversely, the other thing you need to start a business is you need a lot of money. Okay. The people don't realize that. I borrowed, because he just happened to have it at the time because of various circumstances. I borrowed $8,000 from my brother when I started my business, because there were a lot of, and that wasn't nearly enough, right? I really should have had around $50,000 to $100,000 to start my business. And that's what Sonia had. I remember her talking about that on the show one time. I think she had some huge savings built up and there was like a mortgage on the house or something, but she started with money because she knew she was going to be hiring people right away. And you don't get paid for 2, 3 to 6 months after a project. And you need to be able to float those salaries while you're doing that, if you're going to have people. But even if you're not going to have people, you need to be able to float yourself and all the other equipment that you have to buy, or do you have to buy a new vehicle because you're no longer working for someone that's going to supply one for you? Do you have to maintain that vehicle? Do you have to, you have business licenses? I mean, even in California, it costs, it could cost a couple $1,000s just to get your business license in California. A lot cheaper here in Nevada. I got to tell you that. It's like $200. California is way expensive to do it. And then there's all the other things you don't realize. There's insurance. I have insurance that I pay for every single month. It's $300-400 every single month I pay for my insurance, or maybe it's not that much anymore. But anyway, there's all these things that you don't think about when you're starting a business, and having the money, or at least some saved up money, or at least the ability to go take out a loan. I hate to say go take out a loan, because if your business fails, you're stuck with the loan, but you need to have some sort of capital to start that business. And you need probably 100% more than you think you need. But that, and the ability to market yourself, the ability to sell yourself and to sell your services, if you can do those things, then I think you can be a successful specialist. But hey, just thinking about the social media sites that we see, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, how many people do we see promoting those kinds of services? They're on there, but I literally never see it.
Yeah,
Bill, you're on there quite a bit. Do you ever see that kind of stuff?
No, I know. And so that's the other thing too, that, that's like the one piece that I really wish that students would actually pay a lot more attention to is the way that they're portraying themselves on the internet, or the lack thereof, right? I mean, right now, one of the things that's going on is folks are applying to graduate schools. We're trying to choose who's coming in, and it's against the law to discriminate based on things you see on the internet. However, the opposite can happen, where this person has been in the local newspaper, or they're on these different blogs and other stuff, and they have already built their identity on the internet. And then, when you're looking through, oh yeah, that name looks familiar. Oh yeah, that's because I read this amazing, post on analyzing, hand blown bottles from something or other. All those things actually give you, they kind of sell you, right? So if you were to, specialize in paleobotany, not just writing journal articles, but, getting that stuff in the local newspaper about how you learn more about a Native American village, or things that you've done on your university student newspaper or something like that. Those are all things that go into the internet that build an identity for yourself, so that then later on, when you're taking out Facebook ads, or you have Google ads or stuff like that, and you are actually going through and trying to target the market through the internet, you already have stuff that exists. You don't have to make your own podcast, your own blog if you don't want to. I mean, you already have things that you can play off of that help sell who you are.
Yeah.
As far as, small business, I really hope that, the CRM programs and universities are really encouraging people to work for others so they can learn, because that's one thing that is going to be challenging if you come straight out of a master's and you try to start your own business. You're not going to be learning from others. And in any line of business, you need to have mentors. You need to have people you're learning from, and you need to have a little bit of that kind of like a cushion, so to speak, of, having people that can review your work. So if you're working for yourself, who's going to review your work? Who's going to be there, helping you improve your skill set? One area that I think, which is not new, but it is something that would be good for those that are just coming out and going into the business and trying to figure out where they're going to go and whether or not they want to start their own business, is a lot of these contracts are awarded to the larger companies based on some consultants that they have on staff, not on staff, but that they have as part of their bid with the DBE, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. So, a lot of these contracts that the larger companies are going for require to have a certain percentage of DBE. And so that is definitely a niche that you can have. I don't know if you're a veteran-owned business. Chris, are you?
I'm a disabled veteran-owned business.
Okay. So, being able to have that advantage is huge. And I would say, when it comes to specialists, I do think there are going to be some companies that are going to hire specialists, but you know who they're going to be? Other small companies. Right. Because these larger companies are acquiring their own specialists. So when we hire people at Dudek, we're looking for people that have those specialized skill set, so that we don't have to get somebody else from the outside to do it for us. It makes it a lot more efficient, monetarily and time-wise. So I think as far as a specialist goes, if you have the double whammy of being a specialist and having that DBE advantage, that's great. Yeah. Otherwise, I think it's going to be very difficult to have your own company at these days.
Yeah, and something else to keep in mind on those topics is something I was cautioned against way early on, because I made an offhand remark when I was starting my business to the SCORE classes here from the Small Business Administration. I said, hey, my wife is an archaeologist. I should make her the president of the company so we can get woman-owned small business status. And they said, yeah. And I wasn't really going to do that because she had zero interest in joining my company or doing anything with it. But he did caution me, and it's kind of stuck with me ever since. He said, he said, first off, the person whose status your company holds needs to be that there needs to be either one person or a number of people, but it has to be majority owned by people of that status.
Yes.
So if your company's owned by 3 people and one of them is a woman, it's going to be almost impossible to get, woman-owned business status because you'd have to have 2 women, unless that woman had 51% or at least more percent than the other 2 owners combined.
Which is why it's more and more difficult for larger companies to have that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because they're never owned by like one person anymore.
Right.
And then the other thing is too, conversely, I mean, so a lot of men have thought, well, I'll start a company and then put my wife in as the president. But if they find out that she's not actually running the show, because they have to be an integral part of the business as well. If they find out that they're just in name, you're going to jail or you're losing your business, one of the two. And the same thing goes for the other disadvantaged business kind of things, which is like, let's say my wife wanted to start a business and she put me on as the service connected disabled veteran, but I have nothing to do with her business, right? I mean, that's equally bad. so yeah, you can't do those kind of things. You have to be really, really careful with it. So
what you're telling me is there's space for minorities and women to start businesses, because it's not easy. We've talked about this before, to get that status for the federal government. Right now, it's blank in my mind, but I remember Sonia talking about it extensively. To get that kind of status filed with the government, you need to have X amount of track record of taxes. You need to have X amount of revenue, and then a certain percentage of the money that you get goes to I can't even remember right now. I can see their old website, but they updated it too. It's not the Small Business Administration. It's the
I know what you're talking about, but you're right. It's not hard to get these statuses, and some people might think, especially veterans have this problem. They're like, well, I don't want to play on the fact that I'm a veteran, and especially like service-connected disabled veterans or something like that. They're like, I don't want to do that. That's my past, blah, blah, blah. You know what? This is business. Use every advantage that you have. If you're a woman, use that. If you're a veteran, use that.
Well, they have to be an established business. That's what I'm really getting at. They need to be established and need to have track record of pulling in projects. So you don't just, as you're filing your final exams of your undergrad year, pull out an application thing and go to your local city and pay a couple $1,000s to file that. That's not really how it works. You have to have a business that already has to have been going for a while. And then you have to fulfill all the other criteria. And then you can be considered a minority or woman-owned business.
Well, and that depends on the state though, Bill, because here in Nevada, I had veteran business owner status immediately. Well, not immediately. It took me about 6 months just to do the paperwork, right? I had to go to the Secretary of State and get my business license first. And then, I did have one project like right away, just because that's kind of what prompted me to start my business. I was on the fence about doing it, but I had this client that I kind of brought with me, and then we had something to start right away. So I had one within the first couple of months of starting my business, but I didn't have much after that, to be honest, for a little while. And but in Nevada, to get that veteran-owned small business status, it was relatively easy for me to do. I just had to prove it, send in some documents, prove I was the owner, prove my veteran status, stuff like that. I don't know how you prove your woman status.
Well,
I don't know what you said.
That goes into the whole.
Be very careful, Chris.
I was going to say there's a very visible case going on that someone used Ancestry.com to prove that they're a minority because somewhere they had non-white DNA or whatever in their DNA profile, and so they're saying, "Oh no, I'm part Native American and part African American." And they're like, "Yeah, well, that's I don't really know what to say." So they're actually kind of arguing that because this individual had this big company and they're able to change their status based on Ancestry.com or not, or it's like 23andMe or one of the other ones where you actually get your DNA tested. Yeah, so they're saying, well, any one drop of minority blood means that I'm a minority now, and so now I have that status.
Well, and at least that's something that can be legally defined. Like, tribes legally define what makes you a member of that tribe from a ancestral relationship, right? You have to be able to prove basically that you're whatever percentage they say. So that's at least quantifiable. But what if I start saying I identify as a woman now?
Well, so the thing about that is, the tribes are deciding how much an individual is of that tribe, but you can't just say, well, I've got 1/7 of a 10% of Native American somewhere in my blood, so I'm part Native American, right? Or, I've got someone of African descent somewhere in my lineage somewhere, so that means I'm black.
I mean, we're all from Africa if we go back far enough. Can I get that now?
I think we should move
Seriously.
to the next subject.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting a little crazy. But back to my somewhat offhand comment too. It is a little interesting. I haven't seen any or heard any cases like this. I'm not really paying attention to it either. But with gender being so fluid these days,
Sure.
The concept of woman-owned small business is actually like, what does that mean? You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, can you be transgender? Can you just identify as a woman? Can you be, any one of a number of things and then still qualify as a woman-owned small business? Or is this the one thing that's kind of flying under the PC radar,
Yeah, well, I mean, just like anything in sports and some of the challenges that they've had in sports and having, males, biological males that identify as females that are competing against other females, truly biological females, they've had to catch up, and they're going to have to catch up with this too. Eventually, I'm sure they're going to have to define it in some way or another. We'd never had to before, so it's just it hasn't been something that's been dealt with. But I'm sure there's some kind of a definition coming down the road, because it's anything that influences money being made usually happens.
Well,
quicker.
yeah. Well, I would definitely, I hope they do not figure out some kind of 18th century blood quantum thing, because,
oh my God,
I don't know, man.
Yeah.
I don't want to go back. I don't really want to go back to 12 years a slave, and that's how we're deciding who is who.
Oh my God.
I'm just glad we're not the decision makers on that one.
Yeah, no joke.
Indeed. All right. Well, it's a little too late in the segment to start a new topic, so let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll come back on the other side and wrap up this discussion in brand new 2020. Back in a second. You may have heard my pitch for membership. It's a great idea and really helps out. However, you can also support us by picking up a fun t-shirt, sticker, or something from a large selection of items from our TeePublic store. Head over to arcpodnet.com/shop for a link. That's arcpodnet.com/shop to pick up some fun swag and support the show. All right, welcome back to segment 3 of the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 180, first episode of 2020. And we're talking about goals and the future of CRM and things like that. So I know we've talked about this in the last few episodes, but maybe just in a few minutes, because this is a what's 2020 going to look like sort of thing. But let's say the RPA. Let's say the RPA's new registered archaeologist goes smoothly. People start applying for it. People start, gaining that status, that certification. I don't know what it's even called. They become registered archaeologists, I guess. And that's going strong. What do you guys think that means the field looks like? The attitude of the field, the professionalism in the field, whatever. But what do you think the long-term effects of that are going to be? Anything? Nothing? Something? I don't know.
You go first, Heather.
Okay. I think, it's such a good question. Ever since this has come up, and I just did yearly reviews with those that I supervise, and, talking about RA, and, we've been talking about, I think it depends on the approach. There isn't, and it's nice. I understand RPA's approach. They have not really defined everything clearly yet. Although Chris Dorr did say they were going to come out with a few more requirements, but for the most part, I think it depends on the approach that the companies have and that those that are in the field have. So, if it ends up being that everyone who's working in the field right now goes for RA and they qualify for RA and they get a sponsorship, and we end up with the exact same thing we had before. Now we have RPA. And we have RA. We have one. It's this binary. We have either you're RPA or you're not. Except for now, instead of just being not, you're called RA. So, we've had some talks amongst our leadership, and I think if we, if people approach it as, although you just can't control everybody, that it really does there needs to be something that has more teeth in it. It can't just be you come out of graduate school or you come out of your undergraduate and you can become an RA right away. I do think that there needs to be a time or an experience in the field first, and a significant amount of experience in the field first. Whether that means time allotted, which I don't think would be a good idea because people go in and out of this business a lot, but being able to have documented evidence of a certain amount of experience in the field, I think is a really something that has to happen, or this RA isn't going to mean anything. But I do think that the RA is going to be used by agencies, by some agencies. We have some agencies that already have a registry that certain cities, municipalities that say they have to be on their list, not just to oversee a project, but even to monitor. Each monitor has to be on this list, and they have to be okayed by the municipality first, or the agency first. And so for those that haven't done that yet, I do think that the RA is going to be something agencies are going to start using as a litmus test. So that's my 2 cents. And I think until we know better, or RPA gives us a little bit more guidance on this, it's going to be difficult to see where it's going to go.
Yeah, you guys in your discussions, has the 8-hour continuing education requirement been seen as something favorable, or just kind of a pain in the ass, depending on what's actually required?
Well, I think everybody has seen it as valuable, but almost insignificant, because and I know that doesn't make sense. That's a dichotomy, right? Yeah. But I think it's valuable because it encourages people to have continuing education, but it's insignificant because it's going to be very easy to qualify for that. So if you're going to a conference, you're just going to be able to say, I went to this conference. You have one conference. That isn't necessarily going to improve your skill set and improve your ability, your abilities over time. It really isn't, because we all know there's plenty of people that go to these conferences that don't learn a lot for various reasons. Well, there's only so much you can learn in a bar, and
well, I almost disagree with you on that, Heather, because there are a lot of people that don't go to conferences, and California is kind of a different state, because the SCAs are they're almost as big as the other major national conferences, because California is such a big state, right? Mm-hmm. So the California conference, which is down in Southern California this March, I mean, it's a big conference and well attended. And I feel like more people probably go to that because it's actually really cheap to go to as well. Sure. I mean, depending on travel and where it's at, but it's really affordable. Whereas the SAAs, it's $165 or whatever just to maintain your membership, and then another $165 for the ticket to go, and then you've got to get there and blah blah blah. But I knew so many people on the East Coast when I used to work out there that had never been to a conference ever, and I think if you only go to a conference and you only hang out in the bar and you only talk to other people, I personally feel like that networking experience, even if you don't remember half of it, the half after 11 p.m. If you don't remember, even just being around other colleagues, different colleagues, and doing that is a little bit valuable. And if this RA requirement says, hey, more people are going to go to conferences, then maybe that'll have a better knock-on effect of making more conferences a little bit more effective.
I agree in a sense, but I'm going to go back at you, Chris, and disagree again and say that
I feel like Steven's on the show.
just because it's valuable in a sense doesn't mean it's enough as a profession to qualify as a litmus test for a professional qualification, which is Good what point. We're talking about here. So, I do agree with you. I think conferences are invaluable. And I'm lucky I come from a company that actually encourages everyone to go to conference, and they pay for a conference for them each year. So, we have a high price on that experience in my company, but I know a lot of companies don't do that, nor can they afford them if they're a smaller company.
Right.
But
I think if we do make a list of practitioners, like the State Historic Preservation Office has a list of, qualified companies to run projects. I know that Arizona had its own unique and stringent criterias. But if we have a thing like that, if there's a list, and you got to be on the list, even if you finished college, you need to be on there. And every organization or every state can set up at least the minimum for their state guidelines, which, California has their own guidelines or whatever. If we can do something like that, then this new registered archaeologist designation will actually matter. But as we've seen with the RPA, I remember working for a company where the two founders started the CRM company in the laundry room of their house. They had been working in Seattle for years and years. And then they made the whole Secretary of Interior standards where they had to go and get a master's degree. And so probably grudgingly, they all went to some university and got a master's degree real fast, and then went right back to doing work in Seattle. did that actually change, their professionalism or their interest in learning more or any of that other stuff? It didn't. Did it change their ethics or practice of archaeology? No, it didn't. They just went and got a master's degree. So if this is the way that it is, and then also, being a RPA, if you wanted to pay for it, that's cool, but they would actually cover your registration to go to a conference and be a member of the SHA or SAA or something like that, because they felt like learning more about, human past was more important than being part of a professional organization that didn't necessarily, cover everything. So that's when I joined. I joined the RPA and have been a member, ever since. I need to remember to pay my dues in January. I guess that's what's new for 2020. I'm going to start punctually paying all this stuff in January instead of waiting till October or whatever. But, if they actually make it so that it matters at the state or local level, then it will have some kind of significance. If it stays like the RPA, where you can get away with working in some other place without having any kind of, concern for ethics or continuing education or anything else, then it's not gonna mean very much. It's all up to whether they can get any of these standards, including the ones that they already in fact have, to matter at the state or local level.
I agree.
Yeah.
I also think that, although I've said it before, I think this is an excellent first step. But just like you said, Bill, there are other things that need to occur. I also think it would be good to have even more stratification and have another, not just have two, because there's so much differentiation, between people that don't have a master's degree in the field, that I think it definitely warrants at least one more level of certification. But, we got to start somewhere. I'm glad they did.
I think one of the big issues with the RPA in general as an organization is nobody's paid to be there, right? And that might be changing this year. I think they're possibly hiring an executive director. But that being said, I don't know if the executive director is going to be sitting there doing a lot of day-to-day work on the website and the system, but to put into effect some of the things we've talked about is going to require development of systems. Like if you're just recording hours and projects and things like that, they need an intake system, an ability and a way to record that, to review it, to analyze it, to maybe even spot check and quality control. So people aren't just, because how would you would either have to have businesses opt into RPA and say, these people worked this many hours this year, or you'd have to have RPA members and RA members, registered archaeologists and RPAs actually submit that themselves, but then trust that they're not, over submitting and over and changing that. Let's look at,
once again, it has to matter for them, pulling down contracts in, so-and-so county. If they can't pull anything down in Placer County because they don't have that stuff in there, you can definitely bet either someone in the HR or someone else who's actually tracking everybody's hours is going to fill out the form, or they're going to have every single field tech or every crew chief and everyone fill it out for themselves, submit that form, and then they can send that to the RPA. It's like, if you can't get any work in San Francisco or LA County, yikes, that's not good. There's a lot of money sitting on the table there. But if it doesn't matter, and, they don't care about that at the county level, or nobody really cares, nobody has that be a requirement of what you do, then it's not going to change.
Right.
This might be a good little in for Wild Note.
Yeah.
Because if you could establish a program where you are helping companies keep track of the work and the hours that they do, and then that is linked into a required from the state and federal levels, that's actually, you might have something there, Chris.
If everybody's signing into the safety meeting, that's tracking their hours. So everybody has to, if you're taking the safety meeting and you're tracking who is actually all there, because you need to submit that to the mine or whatever, then that's the way that you're actually by proxy tracking these same professional hours.
I do. I think, and you're onto something, Bill. And I think actually a few agencies that I work with are starting to figure this out. So, and the way that is, it used to be where, let's say you have a data recovery, and that data recovery, it used to be, we didn't even have to submit a testing plan, right? Or a data recovery plan. We didn't have to. Now we have to do that. Now we have some agencies that are getting to the point where they're actually not giving the occupancy permits unless that complete report is turned in. So how many times have we seen in the past where you have people do a data recovery and then there's never a report? we don't see a report, and the report's not turned into the information centers, and of course I'm being California specific here, but I do think it carries over to the, to nationwide. And then, you also have, like, let's say the collections, they don't get done because people run out of money. So, now it makes it easier for companies to say, okay, this is a requirement. So we need to make sure that we're budgeting properly so that we do get the collections done. And then if we run out of budget, either because of our own fault or, that we deal with that, but we still, the client does not get their permit to open up shop for whatever development without having everything turned in. How many times have we know there's been a big excavation and there's nothing at the IC, and we know it happened 10 years ago. I just had that experience, and I can't get up my hand on a very, very important data recovery report that would shed light on this site. I can't get my hands on it because I can't get a hold of the guy that wrote it, and the guy never turned it into the IC. Or you have these major, archaeological sites, and their site record is the last time somebody ever, updated the site record was in 1961. But this is a large site, and a lot of people have done work on it. So, I think it'd be great because it's going to be some accountability if that did happen. It would really start. People would have to be more accountable.
Speaking of accountability, and one last comment on this before we switch to the last thing for this episode is, when I was mentioning tracking hours, we're talking about WildNote or whatever, as far as tracking hours and time. In my head, this needs to be something that's rigorous to prevent fraud, right? Because that's what we're always thinking. But I go back to my pilot certificate, right? Like, everybody calls it a pilot's license, but it's a pilot certificate, just to educate you. Anyway, I haven't been current on my certificate for a while. Now, they never expire, but you have to have so many hours and so many takeoffs and landings and things like that to keep current. And if you're not current, you have to have a biannual flight review with an instructor. And to get the biannual flight review with an instructor and pass it, you need to go up with an instructor to make sure that you know what the hell you're still talking about, right? But here's the thing. If I wanted to get my currency, like, I'm really stressing out right now. It's going to cost me about $1,000 to get myself current again through Civil Air Patrol, even, and using their aircraft and at those discounted rates with flight instructors that aren't charging me anything, but it's still going to cost me that much and about fuel to do it, because I feel my own personal self, I need about 10 or 15 hours to really get into these more complex aircraft than I flew 10 years ago. But here's the thing. Nobody's holding my hand away from my logbook from just entering those hours. It's my logbook. It goes down on paper with my own pen. The only thing stopping me from doing that is integrity and losing my license. And that's what I think the penalty needs to be. If we had a higher, I guess, importance on being RPA or being RA. And if, like, you can't work in this business unless you have that. And if any ethical violation is detected, you lose it for the rest of your life. Like, if I were to falsify my logbook for aviation, I lose my pilot certificate for the rest of my life. I can never get that back. And that's a high enough deterrent for me, that and integrity in itself. But if you don't have integrity, then losing your pilot certificate for the rest of your life should be enough.
Should you be flying over my house? I don't think so.
Right? I know, exactly. But I know plenty of people probably just chalk up their landings and add a few more because they needed 3, but they only did 2. And, something like that. And those little fudges in the logbooks, they happen. And, but it's still a system that works, is my point. We don't need to overthink it. So anyway, hey, we only have a few minutes left, but I want to ask you guys, what are your personal goals for 2020? Bill, you're in a very different situation from CRM, but still, we'll start with you because of that. So, what are your big goals for 2020? What do you want to do differently or add to what you're doing or see happen?
Okay, for just 2020, I got to write a bunch of stuff, of course, that. But the one thing I want to get that matters for this podcast, the one thing that I want to do is there's a couple of companies that I talked to at the ACRA conference in October. I was invited to be part of 2 panels. I think we talked about it on the show shortly. And then many of the things that they came up with were things that we've already long since moved past on the podcast and have already, discussed ad nauseum and have talked to other universities. I mean, entire programs have been developed at universities, and I would think that, we're talking to the people who are starting these programs. They're incorporating many of our ideas into university programs. So it was kind of like, you're 5 years late on this whole thing, but thank you for inviting me to come to Spokane.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'll pay for it myself, to tell you that you should probably actually just work with the universities to create the kind of employee that you actually want. So rather than, saying that the universities aren't teaching the students, how about you call in Skype from your busy life of sitting on I-80 and talk to students, and then tell me what kind of assignments you'd like for me to teach, so that they'll actually learn the basic minimum of those skills. And then through those processes of seeing what people are doing in class, you can actually just basically vet your employees from the tech level, crew chief, all the way up, because you've been engaged with your local university. And there's a couple of places who actually, Arizona, the University of Arizona, Pima Community College, CRM companies there. I mean, it's very close. The students who take the field school, they're basically hired straight out to several CRM companies. The curriculum is designed by CRM professionals. They're the ones who are the instructors on the field school. Students are learning exactly what they need to do CRM archaeology, survey, excavation, and all that stuff. And then from there, the people who are working from these companies end up making offers to the undergrads when they finish to come and be the field techs, which is why you rarely ever see an Arizona company posting on shovel bums that they need people. If you see somebody posting on shovel bums in Arizona, it's someone who's actually out of state that doesn't really know anyone, that somehow just needs bodies to finish a project. Those real companies from Arizona, you don't see them posting on shovel bums, because they just recruit and vet and train all the students themselves. So 2020, there's a couple of companies that are interested. I'm going to actually open it up, and I want to start the first round of students that are getting some kind of direct instruction, and actually have the companies discuss what kind of people do we need? Looking out 5 years from now, what do we need these universities to train? What do we need them to do? And, how can we do that? And then I'll do my part by trying to find students who are interested in doing projects that are amenable to that kind of training, so that they can just get jobs.
Nice. Heather, what are your goals for the year?
Wow. I feel like Bill stole my thunder.
Right.
Well, don't worry. You can call Berkeley. You can be one of the ones that tells me. I'll send people on down to you. It's all in California.
Well, actually, I'm already typing you an email, Bill.
I was going to say half my students are from Southern California anyway, and they all want to go back. All the kids from California don't want to leave America. You're hearing this thing about Californians are running away. No, it's not. They're not. They're not coming to your town.
So along the same lines as Bill, for me, really what really gets me going, of course, I love business development, and that's fun. I really feel that I definitely have an entrepreneurial sense, and I am able to use that where I work, even though I work for someone else. So I'm lucky in that aspect. But what really gets me going is seeing the staff that I'm supervising and that I'm mentoring progress in their development. And so for me, my major goals are really, because I already discussed that with my boss, they were really centered around the people that I'm working with and having them progress in their ability. And it's a lot of work, as a supervisor to mentor and work with people, and not just, throwing them work, but really helping them improve their skill set and expand their skill set. Like we said before, in this business, a lot of times you feel like you're just keeping your head above water. But my goal is just to continue to do that, is to carve out time every day for training and mentorship. And so that's my major goal, that and a little bit more of life-work balance, which is always my goal, but I'm not very successful at, but I keep putting it on the list along with losing weight, so.
Nice. Me too. There you go. All right. Well,
no joke. And I just spent like hours working on a Sunday,
Yeah, I've been working basically since noon. So I'll give my goals real quick. So I've got kind of 3 goals for my CRM side of things. As I mentioned, I think I can't remember what podcast I mentioned this on, but I'll mention it again. My company was part of a large, as a subcontractor, part of the same large Navy contract that was won 5 years ago, where I did the 2 projects I've talked about extensively on this show. The same company I was under won that project again. And so if we get some big field projects, my goal is to finally, I think, get Dig Tech to a point where I'm more in a manager supervisory role because I simply don't have time to go in the field, but to help develop more field directors and people at that level that are comfortable with digital archaeology and comfortable with a new workflow and a new way of doing archaeology and are open-minded to that and a new, I guess, sense of efficiency and a new level of efficiency to field work. So I'd love to bring some people into that are willing to do that, assuming we get those projects, because I'm not seeking out a lot of small projects myself anymore. But if this comes down, I'm going to have to do something. And then Team Black, I have lots of things on the books for Team Black, and anybody who's a patron over there at our Team Black Patreon page and is getting our videos, I haven't put anything up in about 4 months because I've been working on a lot of stuff in the background, and I'm going to flood it here in the next probably first quarter of 2020, which is going to be great. A lot of content coming, and not just from me, but I'm seeking out other people, other experts to help produce some content for this, because obviously I don't know everything. These are just my experiences that I'm putting up. So, and then the final thing is the Archaeology Podcast Network. We just hit our 5-year anniversary on December 1st, and I feel like we have all the pieces to the puzzle in place, from the volunteers we have, the wonderful hosts we have, the consistency of shows that we have, the new hosting platform that we're on, the new way that we can do advertising. I feel like we finally have all the things in place to take advertising seriously. And if you don't want to hear advertising, become a member, because you get ad-free episodes early. You get them earlier than anybody else. So if you don't like ads, then that's fine. But to be honest, ads make something like this happen. So the APN has made its first hire, really a real hire of a person who's here in Reno. She's got advertising background. Her name is Madison. Today is her first day, January 1st. And her email address is advertising@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. And if you're interested in advertising on the network, helping us out, sponsoring, doing anything, having a job advertisements on this podcast, then let me know, because I think we're to the point where this year, 2020, the 6th year of the APN, is going to help make us self-sustaining and help us pay for some things like, giving the hosts a little bit of money, upgrading gear and equipment and things like that. I think, and the only way we can do that is through advertising and memberships. So those are my goals, is to really take these businesses and these facets of my business and getting them to a point where they're rolling on their own. So, and Bill's noting in the comments here, so this is January 1st. If you're listening to this in real time, myself, Bill, April from the Archaeology Show, Connor from a Life in Ruins podcast, and probably a few others, we're all going to be in Boston from January 7th to the 11th at the Society for Historical Archaeology meetings. I'm actually getting there on Tuesday for some reason, because I screwed up my schedule. So I have all day Wednesday to just kind of hang out, and then I'll be in the tech room from Thursday and Friday running the WildNote booth. And then on Saturday, there's no tech room. So I have all day Saturday where I plan on hopefully doing a bunch of interviews and talking with people and getting that going. Bill, I don't know what your schedule is for the conference, but I'm sure it's busy. Yeah,
it seems like it's busy, but I think I might have kind of preemptively taken a note from Heather, and I'm doing fewer things. So I'm doing the 3D photogrammetry workshop on Wednesday all day with Ed Gonzalez-Tennant. Awesome scholar, hopefully I'll learn a lot of stuff. Awesome. And then I have a 15-minute talk only on a shootout. I want you all to show up, because it's my 5-year-long search for the location of this standoff in the Idaho mountains. Nice. And I found it. So very cool. Sweet. Of course, only 15 minutes, but I'll talk slow and with a bunch of dependent clauses inside diatribes. So don't worry, I'll have a PowerPoint so you'll be able to see on the screen what I really should be saying. Maybe we'll have you on the Archaeology Show, Bill, to talk about that in a full context. That would be pretty awesome. Sure. All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for Bill. Thanks for sticking it out for this whole time. I'm glad to be starting another year with you on the podcast. Heather, very happy to have you on. It's nice to have fresh perspectives on this show, and you've got a lot of great things to say, even though you do disagree with me. That's what I expect. You told me to keep it interesting. I was going to say, I think most of us disagree. Just Heather has the backbone to say it. That's not the first time I've heard that, Bill. That's interesting. Right. Well, I love it. Thank you. This podcast wouldn't be any fun.
This wouldn't be any fun if everybody just agreed with me all the time. So that's why this is a panel show. So, all right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. And thanks a lot, everybody out there that's the listeners. And come see us at the SHAs. Come see me at the tech room. You know how to get a hold of us. Our contact info is in the show notes. And let's hook up and at least just, have a drink, have a conversation, have a cup of coffee, whatever your deal is. And we like to meet the listeners of the show and just keep the conversation going. So here's to a great 2020. And thanks, everybody, for listening. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRMArchPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week and for the past year. And thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Wow. No Doug for the Happy New Year. That's pretty sad.
Yeah, it's less than 20 seconds for the outro. That's not enough.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.
America. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. By honoring your sacred vocation of nursing, you impact your family, your friends, and your community. At Grand Canyon University, our online RN to BSN, MSN, or DNP degree programs allow you to balance online coursework with local in-person clinical, practicum, or immersion hours. Find your purpose at GCU. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu.